of the sort of in-jokes in these reviews is at the end of the video I'll try to tease the game that's the subject of the next video, and give some sort of hint as to what's coming next. Sometimes this is something that's super obvious because there's just not really a good way to hint at the game, and sometimes it can be a bit obscure. The hints are akin to what the great poet Christopher Bridges said about spring rolls, in that they are unpredictable. Last week was an example of one of the more obscure hints that I've given, in that it referenced these guys. If you're not aware, and if you're not as old as me, this is a picture of Gerald McRaney and Jameson Parker, who during almost the entire decade of the 80s were better known as Simon and Simon from the TV show of the same name. And again, this might be a bit obscure because unlike other 80s action shows with a bit of comedy mixed in, like say for instance Magnum P.I., MacGyver, Knight Rider, The A-Team, or Dukes of Hazzard, Simon and Simon has somehow faded into obscurity with no reboots in television or film form, even though it actually had a longer run than all of those shows mentioned except for Magnum. However, I should probably pause for a second because I'm sure that there's some of you out there that don't know me and are now annoyed because you clicked on this video thinking that you were going to get cute pixelated pictures of animals and instead are getting a dissertation on 80s television and Chinese food. What can I say? It happens. Hi, my name is Dave, and welcome to Zilog and Moto, the channel where I'm as bad at writing lead-ins as the Power Wagon is at not breaking down during an episode. Anyway, I'm out to collect and review the nearly 1,280 titles released in the English language for the Sega Master System, Genesis/Mega Drive, Sega or Mega CD as the case may be, and finally the 32X. Basically, if I can plug it into a Genesis either by itself or with some sort of add-on, and be able to read what's up on the screen, I'm trying to get a copy of it and review it for posterity, with both looks at that original packaging and gameplay captured from original hardware whenever possible. Okay, let's go ahead and unwind this so that everyone understands. One of the things that was supposed to make Simon and Simon stand out from other TV shows at the time was that rather than being set in Los Angeles or New York City, it was set in San Diego, with the first season of the show actually shot in San Diego before it was moved to LA to save money. Due to the San Diego setting, one of the easier choices for the show was having an episode set at the San Diego Zoo, and they did just that in the 5th episode of the first season, The Least Dangerous Game. In all honesty, I probably could have made multiple TV or film references to the San Diego Zoo, some even more obscure than this, due to the fact that the San Diego Zoo has been known as one of the best zoos in the entire world for decades, and as such has been shown or referenced in all types of media, including multimedia, which is what we're looking at today with this review of The San Diego Zoo Presents The Animals, which was released in July of 1994 for the Sega CD and then a few months later in Europe. The Animals is one of the most unique titles that I'll be reviewing as part of Zilog and Moto, and is one that I had no clue even existed until I started collecting the games for the channel. To be honest, I don't even know what it is. Is it an encyclopedia similar to the previously reviewed Comptons? Is it some sort of edutainment title that actually has some game functionality to it? Or is it some sort of video disc that's essentially a virtual tour through the zoo? I'll try to dig into all that without help from Rick and AJ, but first, a look at the package. And here's my copy of The San Diego Zoo Presents The Animals for Sega CD. This copy's in pretty great shape, mainly because, as stated, I didn't even know it existed for the longest time, and when I did find out about it a few years back, I was so curious that I immediately went to eBay to pick out a copy, and thankfully I was able to find a nice one. The extra large jewel case is fully intact with no stress fractures or damage to either of the hinges, and just some minimal scratching to the outer cover. The manual and insert are in very nice condition as well, with no sun bleaching or water damage, and this copy even still has the original foam disc protector that you'll see in a minute. If you happen to be looking for a copy for yourself, you're probably going to have to do some digging, as this is not one I happen to run into a lot, and I think I've only seen it in person maybe a few times. However, even though it's not very common to come across, it's also not very valuable, with prices averaging $20 and under. Well, if you live in the United States anyway, because if you're looking for a European copy, those are instead closer to £90 right now. As far as the front cover artwork is concerned, I like it a lot. There's a great picture of a leopard looking, well, not too pleased to have its picture taken. The picture really stands out and fits the space well, with the logo nicely tucked in at the top and colored to match the leopard's coloring. As the game was originally released on home computer, the cover is very similar to that edition, and then for the European version, they also used the same picture, just cropped slightly differently to fit that form factor. But then they also dumped the nice logo for some reason, so that's a miss. One thing that struck me about the cover is when I think of a zoo, I don't think of a wild animal about to kill me. So having the San Diego Zoo branding with this picture is a bit strange. And apparently on that home computer version, they originally thought the same thing, as the original cover actually features a much more calm picture of koalas. And all I can figure is that the people in marketing didn't think that picture was interesting enough to attract kids, especially with the title now sharing shelf space with other Sega CD and 3DO releases. For that matter, honestly, I'm a little surprised that it didn't get a CDI release, as the title seems to fit in with that platform more than the others, but maybe by 1994 they already knew that ship had sailed, or it was perhaps an issue with the smaller developer, which I'll talk more about in a minute. Flipping over the back, and wow, you can really tell this was previously a home computer release. That is a crap ton of words. And I can't really get mad at any of it. It's all very well written and discusses the features of the title in detail. It's just clearly aimed at parents who are looking for an educational title for their children, rather than having to try to attract the kid themselves with something flashy. The tagline at the top, "Have a true multimedia adventure in the animal kingdom," is about as boring as it gets, and it sounds like something you'd find in a middle school library. The pictures look interesting though. I'm curious to see how well they translate on the Sega CD, because if it's anything like Compton's interactive encyclopedia, it really didn't look great in a lot of places. Opening up the case, and you'll see that foam pad that I was talking about. With the various copies of Sega CD titles that I have, the ones that still have the foam pads I'm always surprised by, because I figured by now they'd have decomposed into dust a long time ago. As far as the manual goes, it is a nice introduction, and then a how-to section regarding the rest of the title that probably is a bit over-descriptive, much like the rear cover. The way everything is laid out, this definitely feels like a title that was previously on home computers, and anyone that's ever played a PC edutainment title probably understands what I mean. Okay, that's the package. Let's boot up the animals and look at some animals. Before diving into the animals, I should probably discuss a bit of the background to the title. And note, I'm saying title there, not game, as there is no game component whatsoever to the animals. As mentioned, the animals had 3 separate releases, the original for both Windows and Macintosh, which was released in 1992, and then both the 3DO and Sega CD releases, which appeared in 1994. However, you might have noticed there that I'm being somewhat generic in discussing when the game was released. The reason for that is there's not exactly a whole lot of information out there about the release. The ever-trusty Sega Retro has a page on it, and in it says that the Sega CD version first appeared in July of 1994, before appearing 2 months later in Europe, but that's the only place that I could really find information about it. Gaming History's write-up on the release consists of restating the full name of the game, mentioning its release catalog number, which is apparently T-87015, the fact that it also had a European release, and finally that it was published by the Software Toolworks. And that's it. But Gaming History's minimal write-up is practically War and Peace compared to its appearance on another site you may have heard of in Moby Games, one of the largest and most detailed gaming resources on the entire internet. Moby Games has this to say about the animals. No, that wasn't a glitch in the recording. Moby Games just simply doesn't have a listing for the release at all. Not the original home computer release, not the 3DO release, and definitely not the Sega CD release. Even if you look up publisher of the Software Toolworks on Moby Games, you'll find their other 2 releases on the Sega CD in Mega Race and Star Wars Chess, but when it comes to the animals, there's just an African elephant-sized hole in their release list. which is unfortunate because I was hoping to possibly find some more information about the developer of the animals, Arnowitz Studios. What, you've never heard of Arnowitz Studios? Well, I'm sure you've heard of, how about, no, that was someone else. I'm stumped, which is why I was hoping they'd have a listing on Moby Games. After searching the internet, I came up completely empty on Arnowitz Studios, which is somewhat surprising to me, as they didn't just develop the one version of the animals, they were responsible for the title on all 3 platforms. The absolute only other thing I could find about Arnowitz Studios is that apparently around the same time as the release of the Sega CD version of the animals, they applied for 2 other trademarks, one for something called Daring to Fly, and one for something called Coral Reef, The Vanishing Undersea World. Both trademarks are listed in the game software category, so I can only assume they were envisioned to be edutainment releases similar to the animals, but as there's no records of those titles, I can only imagine that they never got beyond early development stages. Okay, well, we should probably move on from phantom software releases and developers that you've never heard of, but at least now maybe you understand part of why you've never heard of the animals before. Another reason why this release might have passed you by is simply the content of said release. I mentioned before, the animals is not a game. While I think it's appropriate to still call it an edutainment release, unlike other edutainment titles that I've covered on the channel, for instance, Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego or Sesame Street Counting Cafe, there is nothing that even resembles a game in the animals, other than maybe the fact that your pointer is an animated character named Ping, and you navigate the various sections of the zoo by moving Ping around the screen with your controller until he walks to the area of the zoo that you want to get more information about. To put it plainly, The Animals is a multimedia encyclopedia that is specifically centered around the history, layout, and inhabitants of the San Diego Zoo and its sister facility, the San Diego Wild Animal Park, or as it's now known, the San Diego Zoo Safari Park. I actually wasn't aware of the existence of the Safari Park, by either name, before working on this review, so from an education perspective, I had learned something almost as soon as I had started the application. I talked a bit about the San Diego Zoo in the intro, and if you're not familiar with the zoo specifically, you should really give it a look. And if you're ever in the Southern California area, it is almost a definite must visit. As mentioned, it's routinely in all the lists of not just the best zoos in the United States, but the best in the entire world. As a kid, I grew up going to Riverbank Zoo in Columbia, South Carolina, which by itself is frequently mentioned in similar lists of best zoos in the United States. And I'd always enjoyed going there, but at the same time, I was always curious about what the San Diego Zoo was like. What made it so great and better than my local zoo? And this is what makes, at very least, the idea of the animals a great concept. Kids, and adults for that matter, that weren't local to San Diego, now had a way to visit the San Diego Zoo and see some of the things that make the park great, but for a fraction of the cost of a plane ticket. But the Sega CD version of the title takes things even a step further. Keep in mind that in mid-1994, owning a computer wasn't a given, and even fewer people owned multimedia-capable computers equipped with a CD-ROM drive and a sound card. Having a computer that could play a title like The Animals was something that not all families could afford, with even low-end multimedia machines routinely selling for $1,500, or $3,200 when adjusted for inflation. So, not only does The Animals serve kids and families that couldn't afford to travel to San Diego, the Sega CD release specifically allowed kids to access the same data, but that couldn't afford a well-equipped PC. So, what's actually included with The Animals? Well, after the title screen, you're presented with a diamond-shaped map of the zoo and are given control of Ping, a humanoid-shaped animated cursor. You then use Ping to walk around the zoo, with Ping stopping on predefined sections of the map with various areas and habitats of the zoo. For being a virtual guide to the zoo, I like the use of the human character, and I think my only real issue with the controls here is that it's only somewhat clear where you can actually walk to. It's not a big deal, but if you don't move Ping directly to the next spot that you want to visit and then let go of the D-pad, he'll start walking back to the location where he was before. So it would have been nice to have the locations have some other clearer indicator of what there was on the map, because theoretically you could get close to a location, but not quite close enough, and Ping would start walking back before if you knew that there was actually something there to visit, making it possible to miss areas. This is just a minor complaint though, and I like that they actually went with something more creative than just a basic cursor. Once you get to an area, the name of the area will pop up on the screen, and then you can decide if you want to visit it or keep moving somewhere else. If you do want to check it out, you'll just press the A button, and then you'll be presented with a few options at the bottom of the screen, which is usually a mix of text articles about that area of the zoo, pictures, and video files. There are even a few slideshows with audio that are often used to allow the person to hear what some of the animals sound like in an isolated fashion. Every area of the zoo is also subdivided into various exhibits, which can then be selected by pressing the orange arrow at the top of the screen, which then displays a similar menu at the bottom of the screen with multiple pictures, videos, and text write-ups about that exhibit. At the San Diego Zoo in real life, the zoo is geographically divided into biomes, which represent biomes around the world, things like islands, desert, tundra, etc. And then in each of those biomes in the zoo live the animals that would actually live in that biome around the world. This is how the animals works as well, with the exhibits in each of the areas of the map consisting of the animals that live in that area of the zoo, along with any other information about that part of the zoo. If you don't want to spend time walking around the map and instead just want to go straight to a specific animal or the various contents of the title, the Animals has you covered there too, with both an icon at the top of the screen that looks like a petting goat's head to get a listing of the animals in alphabetical order, and then also an icon that represents a collection of books to get an index of all of the videos, pictures, and other materials included. As much as I like the virtual tour concept, these are both very nice options to have if you just want to quickly find some information. From a graphics perspective, I'm sure some of you out there have probably been groaning for most of the video due to how small and grainy the included videos are. Last week I reviewed Mighty Morphin Power Rangers for the Sega CD, and while the video was still somewhat grainy, it was at least full screen. Here, unfortunately, the video shares more in common with earlier FMV releases on the console, with the videos only taking up a small portion of the center of the screen. But in defense of the Sega CD itself, this wasn't necessarily a Sega CD technical problem. The 3DO version also has similarly sized videos, and while they appear to have more colors, there really isn't that much of a difference between the versions, something that's surprising considering how different Sega CD and 3DO versions normally are. In 2025, you could probably visualize a much more realistic virtual tour of the zoo, but considering the original version of this title came out in 1992, I think what we got here with the animals is pretty impressive for the tech that was available at the time, and completely hit the mark of bringing the experience of visiting the San Diego Zoo into people's homes. Of course, there's no replicating a real-life visit to the zoo, but with the sheer amount of content that's included here, there will be enough to keep interested parties busy for a while. I spent about 3 hours visiting the animals, and I only barely scratched the surface of everything that's included on the disc. While I'm sure that some people will immediately discard this release since it's not a game, when you actually review the animals based on its merits, it comes off very well, and I honestly thought that it was a much better effort than the Sega CD version of Compton's Interactive Encyclopedia. Due to that, I'm giving the San Diego Zoo Presents the Animals 3 stars. Again, it's not a game in any way, shape, or form, but if you just want to spend a few hours learning about the zoo and its animals, you could do a lot worse than spending some time with this release, especially back in 1994.
And that's it for the San Diego Zoo Presents the Animals for Sega CD. Now, this is one of the odder releases that I'll look at as part of Zilog and Moto, but I still very much enjoyed my time with it. Not just from a learning perspective, but also with it being somewhat of a time machine and a portal back to what the zoo was like in the late 80s and early 90s. Much like watching those old episodes of Simon and Simon or other action comedies from that time period, as fun and interesting as it is to experience the zoo on its own, just seeing these very real people and how they talked and dressed and
what's now an almost alien-seeming era before things like cell phones and hair transplants, just always make me step back and think about how much the world has changed in a relatively small amount of time. Having said that, there's one section of the video where a scientist is talking about how rapidly the world is losing species of animals, and specifically calls out that by the year 2000, we could be losing a species of animal every minute. Now, I think he was probably overstating things a bit, but our environmental situation certainly hasn't gotten much better since then, so I'd definitely recommend going and giving your local zoo a visit if you haven't recently. I mean, you never know when it might be your last chance to see a certain animal in real life. Next time on the channel, it's time to review an animal-related release that is actually a video game. Review a video game on a video game review channel? Shocker. Anyway, this is yet another game that actually, the entire series for that matter, I have never played, and honestly, I don't even really know that much about because I haven't ever seen an episode of the TV show that it's based on. I'm familiar with the character, mind you, as he's a Warner Brothers legend, just not this specific version of him. I guess next week will be an opportunity for me to see what all of the mania was about. Anyway, that's it for Zilog and Moto episode 280. If you liked what you saw here and want to see more, please think about liking and subscribing if you're so inclined, as it will help more people see these videos. But most importantly, whatever you like to play, have fun and be excellent to each other. Later!